If you saw the thumbnail of this video about Ruka from Steins supposedly getting HIV and thought it was just a bad joke, I hate to tell you this, but it's real. The good news is that for now, this only affects Russia, so it hasn't become a global issue yet. In 2025, Steins got a new official Russian dub, but localizers decided to make major changes to the story. Most people outside Russia have no idea this even happened, because openly talking about it can get you into serious trouble if you get caught. Thankfully, I'm not from Russia. I speak Russian though, so I can talk about this story without worrying about legal consequences. You might think I'm joking again, but in April 2026, Evgeny Kapiev, the CEO of one of Russia's biggest publishing companies, was arrested because the company had published a book with gay relationships before the ban existed. The biggest change, of course, was what they did to Ruka's storyline. In the original story, Ruka Urushibara is an extremely feminine boy, more feminine than most girls, and because of the show's time travel plot, Ruka eventually becomes a girl. Even if you haven't seen the anime, you might have heard about this meme. But in the new dub, Ruka was changed into a girl from the start and is now written as HIV positive. The dub explains it by saying Ruka's mother got infected at a nail salon during pregnancy and passed it on to her child. I could joke that this localization takes place in some cursed alternate world line Gamma, where Ruka is an HIV positive girl, but honestly, this situation stopped being funny a long time ago. All I can say that it's totally not a choice of Steins I'm sorry, but this whole situation genuinely upsets me. Steins is a very important series to me because it was one of the first anime I ever watched, and Ruka has always been one of my favorite characters, even if I still prefer Korisu overall. Ruka's storyline is emotional and genuinely unique, so seeing it rewritten like this makes me furious. I got so frustrated that I ended up making this video. To do it properly, I had to watch Steins twice, first in Japanese with English subtitles, and then again in the Russian dub. And honestly, it was pure torture seeing just how much of the anime had been rewritten. But why did this happen? What pushed the localizers to rewrite the story so heavily? Russia introduced a law banning so-called LGBT propaganda, and all of these changes are happening because of it. Then, in July 2023, gender transition was also officially banned in Russia. I need to give a bit more context so you can understand what's actually happening here. I called it a new law, but technically it isn't. The first version of the law was introduced back in 2013, and at the time it only banned so-called propaganda aimed at minors. In practice, that mostly meant books with gay or lesbian relationships were automatically labeled 18+, but publishers could still release and sell them without major problems. Actually, this kind of localization isn't even new. Similar things were done in the United States and Russia decades ago. You have probably heard that the Japanese version of Sailor Moon features a lesbian couple, Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune. But when the series was localized for American television, the two characters were rewritten as cousins. Looks like it's okay to be a lesbian, but only if you're in an incestuous relationship.
They're girls and cousins too! Fantastic! You're the best cousins in the world!
Another character, Fisheye, who presents as male while dressing femininely in the original anime and manga, was also rewritten into a cisgender woman. Interestingly, something very similar also happened in Russia. Sailor Uranus already looks fairly masculine and often wears male clothing, so Russian localizers simply turned her into a man. Just listen to how absurd this sounds.
Наверное, ее нейтрализует земное притяжение.
The problem is that after transforming, this male character suddenly starts running around in a sailor skirt anyway, and now it feels like these localization practices are coming back again. Now let's go back to Steins The changes begin immediately with Ruka's introduction in episode 2. In the original script, Ruka's introduction goes like this.
Urishibara Ruka, delicate as an orchid, fair as a cherry blossom, the personification of feminine grace, and a dude.
But if Ruka had supposedly been a girl the whole time, the entire exchange suddenly stops making sense. This is how the new dub translated it. Her manners and voice are like those of a real woman. No, she's definitely more feminine than many, but she's still a girl. Taller than Mayuri and more curvaceous than Mayuri, but she's still a girl. And that mature shrine maiden outfit suits her so well, but she's still a girl. It's already getting dark and the heat still lingers. The cicadas keep chirping, but she's still a girl. Why would Rintaro react like that? Why would he emphasize that she's a girl when she's just 1 year younger than him? And why would he repeat the exact same line in shock? It's literally Ruka's first major scene, and it already feels completely broken. I'm already frustrated, and we've barely even started. Then we get to the next scene. In episode 4, during their first meeting, Kurisutina calls Ruka pretty, and Ruka immediately blushes. After that, Rintaro says, "Some things are better left unknown, huh?" Because he knows Ruka is actually a boy, while Kurisu still doesn't. In the dub, he says almost the exact same line. But why? It makes absolutely no sense anymore. He just says it because the original script said it. And this is probably the smallest problem, that even casual conversations stop making sense after these changes. The real disaster begins in episode 8, when Ruka finally sends the D-mail. In the original version, Ruka agrees to cosplay with Mayushi and admits, "Actually, I want to be a girl. I don't like the way I look. I think I'd feel better about myself if I was a girl. I've always felt this way." But in the Russian dub, that entire emotional confession is replaced with, "I want to be born healthy," followed by a reveal that Ruka is HIV positive. For some reason, it's a secret she was hiding from everyone, which doesn't make any sense. You will know why later. In the original story, everyone except Kurisu already knows Ruka is a boy. Because of that, the dub constantly has to rewrite scenes and add awkward filler dialogue. In the original version, Kurisu is shocked because she genuinely didn't know Ruka was a boy and assumes everyone is messing with her, so Rintaro tells her to check for herself by touching Ruka's chest. You know, for science. And she actually does it, only to realize that Ruka really is a boy. Afterward, she just stands against the wall in complete disbelief that someone that cute could actually be a guy. But in the Russian dub, the entire scene had to be rewritten. Kurisu, who has been the voice of reason since the beginning of the anime and constantly corrects Rintaro whenever he says something dumb, suddenly says she's surprised that HIV-positive people can even live that long. Congratulations, Kurisu. Somehow you became weirdly ableist because of censorship. The Russian localizers also decided not to edit this scene, so Kurisu still touches Ruka's chest anyway. Apparently she can now diagnose HIV through physical contact. Kurisu then says she feels sorry for Ruka, which somehow leads to her standing against the wall in total shock afterward. Even in the original story, Ruka's D-mail already pushed suspension of disbelief a little. The group sends a message telling Ruka's mother to eat more vegetables during pregnancy, believing that this could affect the baby's gender, and somehow it actually works. So weirdly enough, the Russian version almost makes more sense here. According to the Russian dub, Ruka's mother got infected with HIV at a nail salon, although I have no idea how that would even happen. So the group sends a D-mail telling her to go to a different salon instead. They send the D-mail to Ruka's mother's pager since mobile phones weren't common yet, and then Rintaro's reading Steiner activates. In the original version, Rintaro looks at Ruka's chest to figure out whether the experiment worked, but Ruka is still flat, so he assumes the D-mail failed. But in the Russian dub, as you remember, Ruka has HIV instead, which means Rintaro now just looks like a complete creep staring at Ruka's chest for absolutely no reason. In episode 10, the lab members start talking about going to the beach. Kurisu says she wants to come, but only with girls, because Daru and Rintaro are perverts, and Rintaro casually responds that Ruka can't go because he's a boy. What he doesn't realize is that the world line has actually changed, and Ruka is now a girl, so his comment deeply upsets her. Everyone else asks him to apologize, but Rintaro decides to sexually harass Ruka by touching her crotch. That allows him to realize that his experiment worked, and Ruka is a girl now. In the Russian version, the group still plans to go to the beach, and Kurisu still says she only wants to go with girls. But now Rintaro suddenly reminds Ruka not to forget her medication. Kurisu has no idea what he's talking about, so Rintaro casually explains it, like everyone obviously knows Ruka is HIV positive. But hey, at least the scene where Rintaro grabs Ruka's crotch was edited out, so we don't have to suffer through that anymore. Or was it? If you watch the series now, that scene is gone, but when the censorship news first started spreading, this clip became the main thing people shared online because of how absurd it looked. Just think about the logic here. Rintaro believes Ruka is HIV positive, and his solution is to check her crotch to make sure. Even the localizers who rewrote huge parts of the script apparently realized this was too insane, so they eventually cut the scene. One of the worst parts of this entire situation is that someone completely new to anime might hear good things about Steins Gate, open the most popular Russian streaming service, Kinopoisk, to watch it legally, and end up with a completely butchered version of the story. They'll probably walk away thinking it's just a terrible anime with a storyline that barely makes sense, and unless someone explains what happened behind the scenes, they may never realize the series was heavily rewritten in the first place. This could happen to anyone. Maybe you're a longtime anime fan recommending Steins Gate to a friend who barely watches anime, and they unknowingly end up seeing this version first. At that point, you might genuinely ruin anime for them altogether. And this is exactly why piracy still matters. Even if you believe in supporting creators and consuming media legally, pirating the show gives you a far more authentic experience in this situation. But now we get to the most frustrating part of the entire series, the date between Rintaro and Ruka in episode 18. In the English subtitles, the episode is called Fractal Androgynous, but the Russian release even changed the title itself. In the Russian dub, the episode was renamed Immune Activity of Contradictions, purely to hide the fact that the original story was about gender identity. The episode opens with Rintaro telling Ruka that she had HIV in another world line, and that he now has to make sure she gets infected again in order to save Mayuri. Modern medicine allows HIV-positive people to live long and fulfilling lives, but hearing Rintaro talk about infecting someone with HIV still sounds cruel. To be fair, the story had already reached the point where they had to sacrifice Faris' father, so giving Ruka an incurable disease somehow doesn't even sound like the craziest part anymore. Still, this localization feels so bizarre because basic character interactions stop making sense. After that, Kurisu and Rintaro discuss the demail he has to undo, and once again the entire scene had to be rewritten. In the original version, Kurisu struggles to imagine someone as feminine as Ruka being a boy, and assumes male Ruka must have looked more like Daru. Rintaro then reassures her that Ruka looked exactly the same before. In the rewritten version, the conversation suddenly becomes about how scary nail salons are because you might get HIV there, and the characters say, "a new phobia unlocked." Afterward, in the original version, Ruka calls Rintaro to the shrine, asks him to be her boyfriend for the day, and confesses her feelings to him. He hesitates at first because he still remembers Ruka as a boy from the previous world line, but then accepts, probably acknowledging that Ruka is a girl in this world line. But in the Russian dub, the scene comes across like Rintaro is rejecting Ruka because she's HIV positive. Not cool, Rintaro, especially after you already lectured Kurisu about this exact kind of behavior a few episodes earlier. You are not going to get HIV from going on a single date. Just look at how cute Ruka is, regardless of gender, and the cruel Russian localizers decided to infect him or her with HIV. Rintaro and Ruka go on a date, and in the original version, Ruka brings up their very first meeting. Ruka remembers another world line where Rintaro stepped in to protect him from a group of guys taking pictures of him. At the time, Ruka worried that maybe Rintaro only helped because he thought Ruka was a girl, so he directly tells him that he is actually a boy. Rintaro responds that it doesn't matter to him. In the Russian dub, after those guys run away, Ruka suddenly tells Rintaro that she is HIV positive, even though there is absolutely no reason for that confession to happen in this scene. I respect honesty, but telling someone you just met that you are HIV positive is a very strange decision for a first conversation. Now Rintaro suddenly acts completely fine with it, even though earlier in the episode he practically rejected her because of it. Near the end of the episode, Ruka asks Rintaro to save Mayuri. From a purely rational perspective, saving Mayuri matters more than preserving this altered timeline for Ruka to be healthy, but the situation still comes across as cruel, even if modern medicine allows HIV positive people to live normal lives. I don't even know how the real Rintaro would handle a choice like this if it had actually been part of the original story. In the original version, Ruka hugs Rintaro and admits that she doesn't want to go back. She says that if she becomes a boy again, he will have to hide his feelings and will no longer be able to openly love Rintaro, who tells Ruka that it doesn't matter and promises that he will remember the version of Ruka that exists now. In the Russian dub, the entire emotional conflict is rewritten into Ruka being afraid that, as an HIV-positive person, she will never find a boyfriend, get married, or have children. I do not want to downplay the struggles HIV-positive people face, but modern treatment allows many of them to live long and fulfilling lives, and the viral load can even become undetectable. There is still a lot of stigma around HIV, and many people are uncomfortable dating someone who has it, but I genuinely hope those people still find happiness. In the Russian dub, after the timeline changes and Ruka becomes HIV positive again, Rintaro asks whether she loves him, and she answers that she only respects him. That makes far less sense than the original scene, where Ruka is a closeted gay person and struggles to confess his feelings because they believe a relationship between two men would be wrong. Fans still debate whether Ruka is meant to be read as a gay man or a trans woman, but after rewatching the series and paying much closer attention to his storyline, I feel like I understood the character a lot better. Personally, I think Ruka's sexuality and gender identity can genuinely be interpreted in multiple ways, so people are free to read the character however they want. If you see Ruka as a gay man, there is definitely evidence supporting that interpretation. Ruka still loves Rintaro even while living as a boy. The problem is that he believes a gay relationship would be wrong, so he convinces himself that becoming a girl would finally allow him to love Rintaro openly, and without shame. At the same time, most cisgender men don't actively wish they had been born female or feel uncomfortable living in a male body, so if someone wishes they had been born as a girl instead, there is a good chance they are probably not cisgender after all. In an ideal world, Ruka would probably overcome that internalized homophobia openly confess his feelings to Rintaro, and live happily as a gay man without feeling the need to change his body. That is such a layered and emotional storyline, which is exactly why it frustrates me so much that it was removed. What makes this even more absurd is that none of this censorship existed before the anti-LGBTQ+ law was introduced. For example, Steins also received a manga adaptation, and it was openly sold in Russia for years. Some people even mistakenly believed the manga was the original source material, even though it wasn't. And even there, those scenes were adapted faithfully, with Ruka still clearly being a boy until the D-mail. Then everything changed. As you probably know, Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, and when the so-called 3-day special military operation clearly failed to go according to plan, Russian propaganda increasingly reframed the conflict as a war not against Ukraine, but against the West as a whole. And as part of that shift, the government started targeting almost everything connected to LGBTQ+ content. Russian officials heavily pushed ideas like conservatism, traditional values, strict gender roles for so-called spiritual bonds. The message was simple. Russia was supposedly a traditional civilization defending itself from a morally decaying West. In that worldview, there was simply no place for LGBTQ+ people. In 2021, a novel called Pernia Summer was released by the Ukrainian-Russian writing duo Katerina Silvanova and Elena Malisova. The story originally started as fan fiction, before being picked up and officially published by Popcorn Books. The novel sold a staggering 200,000 copies, which quickly attracted attention from anti-LGBTQ activists across Russia. In August 2022, a sequel was released, and soon after that, one of Russia's most famous propagandists and writers, Zakhar Prilepin, started publicly attacking the books. Soon afterward, the authors began receiving death threats from Russian patriots, and eventually had to leave the country. Same happened to Danmei, or Chinese boys' love novels like Heaven Official's Blessing, which also became popular in Russia, so they were heavily censored and then banned too. I don't want to pretend that all Russians are homophobic, and the success of those books clearly proves that is not true. But there are still plenty of people who hold homophobic views or genuinely believe that children can somehow be turned gay, so fears about demographics and traditional values became an easy way for the Russian government to score political points. The result was a massive increase in censorship, because everyone in Russia understands that these vague laws can ultimately be used against you if the authorities decide to make an example out of someone. And that is exactly what led to Ruka's storyline being rewritten in the first place. This is basically the last major Ruka-focused storyline, so most of the remaining changes are smaller and nowhere near as frustrating. For example, they remove some smaller cultural references, such as a reference to the old Japanese movie Yellow Handkerchief, which most Russian-speaking viewers probably wouldn't recognize anyway. The Russian dub in general has a habit of rewriting anime, so viewers don't need any knowledge of Japanese culture to understand it, but compared to what happened to Ruka's storyline, those changes feel relatively minor. At the same time, I do want to give credit to the localizers. They actually did a pretty solid job adapting jokes and slang for a Russian audience. Steins Gate is packed with references aimed at Japanese otaku culture from around 2010. For example, Rintaro and Kurisu use Nichannel, the Japanese message board that inspired 4chan. Instead of directly translating old Japanese internet memes that nobody would understand, the translators replaced them with Russian image board slang and memes from the same era, and honestly, that part worked surprisingly well. I also like that they changed the credits to the episodes so that they're in Russian. It shows commitment. I also genuinely liked the voice acting, and I feel bad for the actors who had to work with this rewritten script. And this might sound surprising after everything I said in this video, but I don't blame the localizers themselves. The real responsibility lies with the Russian authorities, who turned anti-LGBTQ politics into a political tool, and I'm sure that most people working under these conditions would rather release their work untouched, but they censor it because the alternative can mean fines, lawsuits, or even arrest. It is not like everyone gets arrested because it's not needed, but the fear comes from the fact that it can happen to anyone, even small fanfiction writers, so people start self-censoring over the smallest things just to stay safe. Russia has a government agency called Roskomnadzor, usually shortened to RKN, which oversees censorship and internet restrictions. It is deeply unpopular among ordinary Russians. At one point they even banned Roblox, and later a teenager killed an RKN employee. As I said, the worst thing this system creates is self-censorship. Out of fear, publishers begin removing anything that could be seen as conflicting with so-called traditional values or spiritual bonds. That includes editing out scenes involving incest from Game of Thrones, even though those relationships are central to the plot, and removing them makes parts of the story almost impossible to follow. Even Fight Club was affected. At this point, two men hugging on screen can suddenly be treated as suspicious. Actors who publicly criticize Putin have had their names edited out or faces blurred out of projects entirely. In the popular Russian movie What Men Talk About, the main characters originally drive from Moscow to Odessa for a concert. In censored versions, they now just go somewhere. Some books now contain entire pages covered with black bars whenever the story includes anything prohibited, mostly same-sex relationships. Manga is affected too, such as Oshi no Hada ga Areta have entire pages censored. Western comics are censored as well. Even books and TV series that already passed strict Chinese censorship still end up getting censored again in Russia. Song lyrics mentioning drugs are often rewritten, muted, or censored entirely. Even pirate manga sites haven't been able to avoid these laws. MangaLib, one of the biggest manga sites in Russia, was fined 14 million rubles over LGBTQ-related content hosted on the platform. Shikimori, often described as the Russian equivalent of MyAnimeList, has been blocked multiple times simply because its database includes LGBTQ-themed anime and manga, which also includes stories including cross-dressing, such as Oran High School Host Club. It is not even that these sites refuse to cooperate. The problem is that they host thousands of manga and anime titles, and monitoring every single page is almost impossible. What makes this especially sad is how heavily it damages culture itself. Piracy has become one of the only ways for many Russians to access uncensored versions of media. At the same time, most people working in creative industries clearly dislike these restrictions as much as everyone else, and they still find subtle ways to express that frustration without saying anything concrete. In a strange way, those black bars inside books almost become a form of protest themselves. They remind readers that there is still more content underneath, even if the audience now has to search for it on their own. Most people, when asked about censorship, usually respond with something like, "Sorry, but we have to follow the law, we don't want to go to prison." Others simply say, "I'm not a political person," which in modern Russia often really means, "Please don't get me arrested." And honestly, I understand that. They are victims of the system too, but the Steins situation is very different. As I mentioned earlier, the anime credits were edited, and one name in particular stands out among the people responsible for the localization, the project manager, Evgeny Krasnov. And he is a pretty interesting figure in the Russian anime scene. He is the head of content and marketing in Deep, short for Dentsu Entertainment Eurasia Partners, a company connected to the Japanese advertising giant Dentsu. Before all this, he became well known through fan-made pirate voiceovers that were popular in Russian anime communities. Now, obviously, he is strongly against piracy. At one point, he even pressured Russian cinemas that wanted to screen Kazakh copies of the Chainsaw Man movie before its official release. And this same company ended up handling the Steinsgate localization. Telegram is by far the most popular social platform in Russia, and Krasnov runs his own channel there, where he regularly posts localization news. Naturally, he also addressed the Steinsgate censorship controversy, but instead of not giving an explanation at all, which would be understandable, or even saying something like, "Guys, we are trying not to get arrested," he responded in a way that came across more like mockery. Here is one of the posts from his Telegram channel. "Hi everyone, I'm Ruka, sometimes called Lukako. I arrived in Russia a few days ago, and I love it here. I don't understand why everyone is so aggressive with me. After all, I'm just a character from the anime Steinsgate. Yes, I am sick, but I will be cured. I'm happy to be a full-fledged member of society here in Russia. Love you all, and Happy New Year." The word "sick" here is clearly meant as a reference to HIV, and the entire message is written from a female perspective, something Russian speakers immediately notice. Or maybe this post. Oh boy, I'm looking at what's going on in the comments for Paradox Live, and I see these aggressive girls screaming that we made a mistake regarding the gender of one of the characters, Anne. Look guys, you live in Russia, and here Anne is a girl, not some other gender. Because of the LGBT laws, people have started shouting in the comments about how bad Deep is, and how they failed to familiarize themselves with the lore, while commenting on the news that so-called LGBT propaganda had been banned in Kazakhstan. He said, "I remember a subscriber from Kazakhstan telling me this would never happen there, and that anime would never be censored. Well, how's that working out?" Clearly mocking the fact that such a law had been passed. And while I was still writing this script, Krasnov made another post about the new Ghost in the Shell adaptation, which reportedly includes a lesbian storyline. Furthermore, maybe I missed something, but when did LGBT even become the norm? And why are there so many people defending scenes like these? Perhaps you shouldn't live in Russia then, and should move somewhere else? Look, in other countries, platforms will show it without censorship, though there won't even be Russian subtitles, let alone a dub, and no one is going to screen the first episodes in cinemas there anyway. LGBT is an extremist organization, prohibited on the territory of the Russian Federation. Once again, he wrote, When did LGBT become the norm, and why are so many people defending scenes like this? The thing he completely misses is that people aren't upset because they desperately want more gay or lesbian scenes in anime. Most people simply respect the integrity of the original work. If the creator chose to include LGBTQ+ characters, then those elements are part of the story and shouldn't be rewritten out of existence. If a story was originally about an HIV-positive character and someone later rewrote it into something else with an LGBTQ+ angle, I would still be against that. The simplest solution would be to stop licensing shows that require massive rewrites in the first place. What happens next? Do you license Bloom into You and rewrite one of the girls into a man? Or maybe this time someone else suddenly becomes HIV positive too? Or what about Given, a boys love anime where they just gonna rewrite one of the male characters into a girl? There are thousands of anime without any mentions of LGBTQ+ to license. They already did something similar with ReZero by turning Ferris into a girl named Felixina. Honestly, what a shame. It's unclear whether Mr. Krasnov had permission from the Japanese side to make such major changes to the show, but if he did, that makes the whole situation even sadder. It would mean the Japanese licensors signed off on an anime being rewritten and butchered to this extent. The fact that they still license these shows only to heavily rewrite them makes me think one of two things. Either they genuinely don't care about story integrity, or there is a more ideological reason behind it. And when someone says, when did LGBT even become the norm, and why are there so many people defending scenes like these, it sounds less like frustration with censorship laws, and more like someone who already disliked gay people finding an excuse to remove them from the media. Localization has become one of the biggest online debates in recent years. Some people accuse woke translators of changing media for political reasons, but at the exact same time, Russian censorship created the perfect excuse for openly homophobic people to remove gay and trans characters they already disliked. Like I said earlier, I do not want to blame people who risk prison for openly opposing censorship. But at the same time, it is also true that plenty of people are perfectly fine with removing LGBTQ+ characters from the media they consume. A lot of people think that culture war debates and fighting the so-called woke mob only exist in English-speaking countries, but those ideas were imported into Russia extremely successfully. Even people who have probably never met a black, trans, or openly gay person in real life spend hours every day obsessing over their presence in media and making endless videos about it, despite living in a country where LGBTQ people are actually facing state censorship and discrimination. Even creators who already left Russia rarely talk about these issues directly because those videos usually do not perform well. Meanwhile, another rant about gays and feminists ruining media will instantly get far more clicks and attention. Some creators openly admit that they are not even particularly racist or homophobic themselves, but outrage brings views and money, so they keep feeding that audience anyway. And while a war is happening, people are losing rights, trans people can no longer legally transition, and even fanfiction writers risk arrest over LGBT propaganda laws. Some people still choose to spend their time making videos about the woke mob ruining anime localizations in America, because apparently that's a much bigger problem to them, and honestly, that is one of the saddest things that can happen to someone working in media. At some point, people stop merely trying to avoid punishment and start becoming actively complicit with the state itself because they think it will save them. This happens especially often with people who already held homophobic views before, but now feel validated because their beliefs suddenly align with state policy. Instead of reluctant participants, they become enthusiastic defenders of censorship. Mr. Krasnov's channel also has a public chat, and reading through it was a mistake. A lot of people there openly defend censorship, support the invasion of Ukraine, and casually throw around slurs toward Ukrainians, black people, gay and trans people, and none of this is condemned. It was depressing to read. As long as the war continues, I do not think these anti-LGBTQ laws are going anywhere. After the war, I hope Steins Gate eventually gets a new dub without all the censorship. I genuinely love Steins Gate. It is one of my favorite anime ever, and seeing it butchered like this honestly broke my heart. That is the whole reason I made this video. Like I said earlier, I don't live in Russia, so I don't personally face these risks, but many Russians do, and some still try to resist censorship in whatever ways they can. Others are simply trying to avoid prison, which is a very real fear there, and I understand it. But the worst outcome is when people stop resisting entirely and become part of the system themselves. Ruka is adorable regardless of gender. Also, drink Dr. Pepper because it is the beverage of intellectuals. I don't even really like the taste of Dr. Pepper, but after watching Steins Gate twice for this video and constantly seeing Rintaro and Kurisu drink it, I still ended up buying one myself. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.